I'm Jason Gibb, founder of Bread and Jam, and this is Breaking Bread. Every episode, I sit down with the key people shaping the food and drink ecosystem. The founders building the brands, the investors backing them, and the buyers deciding what makes it onto the shelves. Charlie is founder of Harmonic, a B-certified recruitment agency. He's spent his career placing the right people into fast-growing startups and scale-ups. And along the way, built and sold his own £30 million business. And today, Charlie reveals what he's learned from working alongside and mentoring some of the most successful challenger brands in FMCG. This is his story. So Charlie, you started out at Oxford, a very posh-sounding university, studying modern history and politics.
Yeah.
And then, but you kind of came out with a strong entrepreneurial streak. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm not from the sort of typical background of people that do the Oxbridge route. Certainly haven't had a sort of hard knock life. My parents were both teachers, but I went to state school in Huddersfield, which was an interesting experience. And then, moving into that sort of Oxbridge humanities degree setting was a bit of an adjustment. I guess in terms of where I found, that kind of interest in entrepreneurialism and things, it didn't really come from that university setting. I think there's been one of the things we see as headhunters, obviously at Harmonic, is just how there's been a bit of a shift in terms of how the cool thing, I think, certainly over the last 5-6 years has been to become an entrepreneur, set up a business, I think. Whereas certainly when I was at university, it was being in a band or a DJ. And for those people who were maybe a bit more small C conservative, it was being a sort of lawyer or a doctor. Whereas there's been a big shift, I think, last few years.
Oh, so do you think being an entrepreneur is the new DJ then?
100%. Yeah, I think there's been a massive expansion of the kind of media industry around fundraising and the kind of hype around that. And I think there's a lot of positives from that, actually. I think certainly like the VC ecosystem is one of the greatest things about the UK economy. Mm-hmm. But I think there's also a large element of it is also kind of personal brand building and kind of PR that's come out of that as well. Mm.
But so going back to kind of coming out of university, you looked at recruitment. Like what happened? Tell me what happened after university. What were you up to? Yeah,
so I actually am one of the kind of few people in our sector who actually specifically targeted becoming a headhunter. And I guess we'll come on to why I set up my own business. Just a sort of fairly serendipitous moment of bumping into a family friend who had been a very successful headhunter in the United States who suggested I'd be a good fit for the industry. I've always been really interested in people, their stories, culture, commerce, and doing what we do, particularly with early stage entrepreneurs. We're quite a privileged position, really, in terms of seeing these businesses develop and how they operate.
But tell me, so you met this kind of inspirational guy from the States, but how did you know where to start? Like, how did you start your business from scratch?
So I actually worked for a startup, a 4-person startup, straight out of uni in Bristol. Kind of figured that I had sort of fairly natural kind of aptitude for headhunting and business development, which really is the core of the role.
Right.
But I also kind of always had a bit of a I don't know whether it's some buried personality disorder or not, but I've always had a bit of an issue with sort of authority and not having full control over my own destiny.
Right.
So I think probably through a sort of misplaced arrogance, really, after 3 years of being a kind of graduate employee, decided to set up my own business. Back in 2008, actually, the first company.
Because you didn't like being told what to do?
In large part, to be honest, yes. But I think also I've always had quite a strong, without sounding kind of overly sanctimonious, I've always had quite a strong kind of moral compass around how I think workplaces should operate in terms of how they deal with customers and how they make money. I'm kind of unashamedly pro free markets, but only in the right kind of setting. So a big part of it was also just that I I wanted to have control over like the values and culture within the workplace as well.
Because I mean, that's it. It's very interesting because the recruitment world has got a bit of a reputation for kind of sharkish behavior.
Yeah. And I think justifiably so, really. Like it's one of the things that we often talk about at Harmonic is that I actually think what we do should be, I'm going to be very unpopular in the sector for saying this, but I actually think it should be regulated in the same way that, legal firms or, accounting practices are, because we're privy to really confidential information about company finances. Sometimes that might include whether they're going to list on the stock market in some cases, right? So there's that. But also we deal with a lot of people who are in quite emotionally vulnerable positions. That might be that they've just been made redundant and they have kind of family pressures or, and a lot of kind of confidential HR type information. And I think it's kind of wild that for that reason alone, it's not more regulated.
Yeah.
So I've always tried to run my businesses as if we were, which kind of leads in nicely to the development of obviously the B Corp community of which we're part at Harmonic.
We're definitely going to come back to that in a minute and more about Harmonic, but I want to know about your first business. Like you grew it up into a £30 million business.
Yeah.
And you sold it. Like,
yeah.
How the hell did you do that?
Yeah, it was an interesting story. So I set it up with a very kind of meager savings that I'd managed to accrue from the first few years in my one and only job, as it were. I then actually, ill-advisedly in hindsight, actually raised investment from a couple of ultra high net worth investors. And actually from a kind of public PR perspective, that story was very exciting and a bit of a rocket ship, really. We obviously got to 30 million revenue in 7 years, just over 100 colleagues. We were trading at one point in 12 different countries, 7 currencies. It was very complex business.
Gee.
And I think, I certainly was kind of more susceptible, I think, in my 20s to sort of caring more about what the market and other people...
What the optics were.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so what... Because we hear this again and again about being cautious about raising investment too early or with the wrong people. Tell me what was the learning what was the mistakes that you, in hindsight, think you might have made?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately with investment, like there's a lot of amazing investors, right, in the food and beverage ecosystem. Some of them angels, some of them, as we know, VCs or PE, right? So I'm certainly not anti-investor, but I do think that the mistake a lot of younger entrepreneurs make, and I was 23, 24 back then, is fail to get good legal advice and good commercial advice in terms of like, what are you actually agreeing to? Like, what are the restrictions? What are your obligations? And I think, back in the day, I probably spent a few £100, which felt right then a lot of money was to me, but actually I didn't have the right advice. So I think my main tip is, speak to other founders that have raised that are maybe a bit further along in their journey. What are the watch outs, but also, get a good lawyer that understands startups.
Right.
I think.
So it's about the kind of structure of the deal. And I think it's even more tricky now that a lot of people think, oh, well, I get AI to kind of draw up the contract for me. So I think more and more people are going to make that kind of mistake.
Yeah. And I think AI is helpful, but as you say, it's kind of only as good as the prompts that you give it. And I think that's where obviously there are numerous firms that can advise, but I think, the likes of Jolson that I know, a number of Bread and Jam community members will use, it's people like that can give you proper advice in these situations. So yeah, it went incredibly well. We won lots of awards. We're sort of top 5 in the Sunday Times lists, but it was one of those situations where it was very exciting, but it wasn't in essence my train set, really.
Right.
In the sense that because of the investor structure, I had to make a lot of compromises around culture, whether we prioritized profit in many cases over, in my opinion, obviously subjectively, doing the right thing sometimes for the culture and the team. And also I think we we found ourselves really focusing on big corporate clients, you know, many of whom are lovely people, but you know, personally, I found it much less inspiring, you know, doing exec searches for kind of Reckitt or big conglomerates than some of the work that, you know, I now do in my sort of, I guess, kind of mid-phase in my career as an entrepreneur. So it's one of those where it was fast growth, looked amazing, but actually was kind of quite miserable by the end of it in terms of actually running the business, just because I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel proud of the work that we were doing.
Gosh. Yeah. A good lesson learned, but nevertheless, you managed to kind of sell it for a nice chunk.
Yeah.
Presuming that you still had quite a bit of equity in it and walked away with some good money. Now, a lot of people get a successful business under their belt and then they're shit scared of trying to do it again because they're like, oh, was that beginner's luck or you know, am I really good? And what was your mindset at that point?
I mean, I felt like I had something to prove still. I think because my exit, although it was very lucrative, as with a lot of businesses, there was quite an extended earn-out period.
Yeah, right. Okay.
As part of the agreement.
And explain what an earn-out is.
So this happens in both FMCG and services businesses where the acquiring company, particularly if that's private equity, will often want the founding team to stick around just to make sure that kind of key customers and relationships are handled well. Again, thinking about the quality of advice that I received in this situation, you know, I ended up with an earn-out of 5 years.
Oh, wow.
I'm not built for being part of bigger groups of companies, like particularly if there's not kind of close alignment in values. And so I actually stepped out kind of midpoint through the earn-out, which meant that I left a lot of money on the table.
Got you.
Although, you know, to this day, it's slightly galling because that business just sold actually again for, I think it's like 165 million last year.
What?
But I genuinely like have no regrets about
You
doing
did the
that.
right thing, yeah.
And actually that was, you know, one of the things that really sort of inspired me to kind of build Harmonic was like, actually, can I do this again?
Yeah.
But can I do it without external investment? And can we do it in a way where actually the values piece is much more at the forefront versus maximizing profit?
Right.
Yeah.
And do you ever think that, so let's kind of talk about building Harmonic, which you're still doing now, and the kind of the values behind it. Is that kind of become a strength? Does that, what does that, other than just making you feel better about doing it, is there any other kind of added benefits?
So, yeah, I mean, I think as you identify, obviously part of the reason I've built the business on those foundations has been just so that I feel kind of at peace that I'm doing like good work, right? But I think there is certainly like commercial benefits to doing that as well, in terms of growth and a number of other things. I think one is that one of the key changes I think in the economy has been, certainly in my career, which is now like 20 years in the industry, is that a lot of younger people really used to focus on, you know, what can I earn, right? I want to get on the property ladder.
Yeah.
Obviously purpose was always in there, but it stack ranked for many of them, I think, maybe third. I think now, like partly just because of the way the economy is, I think unless people, you know, maybe are lucky enough to inherit family money or be given a deposit, it's a bit of a pipe dream for some people to be able to afford property. So they feel a bit disengaged from the economy. And I think with that comes, one of the things I've seen is that people really care about, like, you know, why does my work matter? Like, who am I working for as an individual and organizationally? What do they stand for? What am I going to learn?
Right.
So purpose, I think, has become much more important than I think for certainly kind of younger millennials and Gen Z coming into the workforce. So it certainly helps as a recruitment and retention tool, I think.
And that's really fascinating. And I want to come on to B Corp, but like, so what are the lessons in that for FMCG brands?
So I think a number of FMCG brands, particularly before, if they choose to go down that route, they fundraise. One of the biggest difficulties they'll find will be acquiring the right talent.
Yeah.
Because they'll be capital poor.
They can't afford to pay top dollar for proven people.
Exactly. So what they've got to do is either recruit, people who are super engaged with the mission, who are willing to take a, cut in cash compensation, sometimes in return for equity, or they'll need to recruit, very bright, often young generalists in a very competitive market alongside lots of other FMCG brands. And I think being able to kind of clearly communicate your mission, vision, purpose, your values, in terms of what do you stand for, what do you stand against, I think can really help you acquire a lot of this talent and customers for that matter, without spending a lot of money. And if I think about practical examples of that, I think like what Amelia's done with Bold Bean, for example, would be like a really great example of that, actually.
Can you give me some kind of evidence or examples of how she's done that?
So I think from kind of day one, what she's done very effectively is kind of build in public. So there's been clear, consistent communication around, her why, like why did she found the business? Like why does she care?
Right.
There's been clear communication around passion for the product and the quality and why that has an impact on society.
Right.
But I think there's also been like a really kind of authentic, and that word gets overused, right? Obviously nowadays, doesn't it? But I think she is really authentic, and a kind of vulnerability around actually like, this might seem pretty cool being an entrepreneur, but actually it's bloody hard.
Right.
But this is why I care, and this is why we're going to win.
So showing some vulnerability and some kind of genuine emotion.
Yeah, which I think is like an interesting counterpoint to some of the bravado you sometimes, for instance, get in tech, which can also be, not always, but can also be quite bro-y. So I think the way she's delivered that's amazing. And as a result of that, I know she's been able to make a number of key hires that I think they would have struggled to have done otherwise at that growth stage.
Great insight. Any other food and bev or FMCG brands who you kind of feel have managed to communicate that purpose well and use it for good recruitment?
Yeah, I mean, I think another brand you and I discussed, previously, I think outside this podcast, is Simmer Eats. I think in terms of what Simi and Jay Dillon have done, coming from local authority housing, parents, working, very tough, low income jobs, so no investment,
right,
to being able to build out their brand, which I think is now doing an ARR greater than Mindful Chefs.
Wow,
it's phenomenal. But also being able to, having bootstrapped that business, hire the entirety of a food production team, supply chain, marketing, etc. And how have they done that? A lot of it is force of will from Simi, but a lot of it also is around comms of like their brand. Why are we disruptive? Why should you care? And they've just expertly driven a lot of engagement through TikTok and Instagram that obviously has helped them acquire customers, make revenue, but it's also helped them make a lot of key hires as well.
Yeah. And in that kind of story about selling your purpose to people who might become part of your team, where does kind of B Corp fit into that?
I mean, I think B Corp for us has been integral. It's actually so I set Harmonic up when I was actually living temporarily in California and had like a, nice amount of time when I wasn't working to sort of think about what the brand was going to stand for.
Right.
And I'd been following the kind of early phase of B Corp with interest, really, because obviously that started out in, California, and you had, the likes of the founders of Patagonia kicking that off.
Yeah. And actually do remind us what B Corp is and kind of how it works.
Yeah, so B Corporation it's a community of companies that basically at its heart stand for doing no harm, and whether that's from a kind of social perspective or environmentally. But I think more positively, each of the B Corp community, commits to having a positive impact on the environment. We all commit to putting purpose above profit.
Right.
And we actually commit to doing that legally as part of, our articles of association.
Right.
We commit to doing that. We also commit to putting our team and our workforce above profits. And there are various heavily audited kind of diversity quotas, impact emissions quotas, etc. So to become a B Corp, you go through a very stringent audit process, which took us about 2.5 years.
Wow.
To go through the whole journey. We've recently recertified actually as a B Corporation. So we've been part of the community for about 5.5 years, I think now. For reasons I'm happy to discuss, I don't think the community is perfect, but it's a kind of fundamental underpinning, really, I think, about what we stand for culturally.
And because I know consumers like B Corp, it's becoming more kind of recognized by consumers. Supermarkets and retailers like B Corp. But do you think that FMCG brands who are B Corp have got a bit of an advantage in terms of recruiting good people?
I do, actually. I think there are regional differences. So we also operate in the States and work with a lot of entrepreneurs over there. Interestingly, I think it's gained a lot less traction there than it has in Europe. But I think certainly UK, France, Spain, I think it's really prominent. And I think the feedback we get certainly from, I guess, demographics under 35, I think people really look out for that.
Really?
Yeah.
Right.
Although I think the people at B Corp do a really fantastic job, I do think the movement could do with having more teeth in terms of how it, for want of a more positive way of putting it, maybe kind of ejects some of the companies. I think we don't hear enough about companies that are no longer B Corps and why that's the case.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Because I think we saw obviously outside of FMCG, we saw Havas, media were kicked out last year because they'd secretly taken on a Shell oil account, which obviously is not that consistent.
Wow. Right.
We also saw obviously the slightly creepy beer guy that we all know and that big company getting kicked out, which I think was a positive when you saw some of the allegations from the team. But actually, I think the fact that probably you and I can't think of any others would kind of indicate to me that there could perhaps be more kind of stringent overview of what B Corp really stands for. Yeah.
Cool. Really interesting. So now tell me, so you're in California, you decided to set up Harmonic in, I think, the kind of early 2017. What was the focus of, I know it's recruitment, but was there any particular kind of areas that you were focused on?
Yeah, so our thing is strategic leadership. So, that's general managers, COO, CFO and obviously founder succession hires if they're looking for a CEO. But also our core thing is the support functions, so finance and operations. And the reason that I founded Harmonic on that basis was that one of the things I've seen as a founder and being part of various founder communities is that all of us, and I include myself within this in my first business, chronically underinvest in support functions. We all get excited about brand, go to market, product or service. But often what tends to happen is there's then a bit of a debt accrued to finance, etc., because we historically might find it less exciting. And then as a result of that, what we often see, unfortunately, is that, for founders looking to fundraise, the wheels fall off a little bit because they don't have the forecasting and the data that investors might require. But also what can often happen as well is that, for example, particularly within FMCG businesses, there's kind of a lack of understanding around the differences between, revenue and profit, cash, etc. So I felt there was a gap in the market to find finance and operations leaders and mid-level managers who were able to kind of speak the language of entrepreneurs, and help them scale their businesses. Right.
Yeah, because I've certainly noticed there are a couple of businesses that I know well, and their first hires after the founders were the head of finance type person, and it really set them in good stead.
Yeah.
But what would you, if you're looking at a fast growing FMCG business, couple of founders, what should they be thinking about as their first hire and then their second and third hire? What would you advise them?
Yeah, I think I think without ducking the question, and because I'll come back to a succinct answer on that in a sec. I think there isn't really a set playbook for that, and I think founders should really be cautious at looking at what other businesses have done and maybe kind of emulating that.
Okay.
And the reason I'm saying that is I think the first thing that all founders should do is kind of really critically evaluate what they're strong at and where their kind of blind spots are. So, and I think that should really determine who and like what you hire. And so, for example, I think if you've got, you know, two founders who are like product obsessed, and or like, you know, particularly good at kind of brand development, for example, but have a blind spot or are terrified of getting out there and selling, you know, really looking at someone within go-to-market sales in that situation would be wise, right? Equally, if you've got two of you, one of you's great at getting out there with, you know, buyers, etc. The other is great at product development, and you've got a blind spot in terms of being able to look at kind of the P&L management, budgeting, etc. In that situation, finance is key. So I think it's important to take the time to sort of do that analysis before making those decisions. But I think if you had to press me on anything, I think it's really key, I think, for founders to go early on, even if it's midway in terms of seniority, good salespeople. Because if you've got no revenue, you're not going to survive, as we know. But also, I think certainly either second or third, thinking about how you may evolve out of relying on a kind of part-time bookkeeper, as you suggest, I think often does, you know, set these businesses up for success.
Hey, I just want to pause here for a moment. You've heard Charlie talk about the importance of team building and hiring the right people for the right roles. Well, one of the biggest mistakes founders make is not having someone who knows how to set their financial house in order before they go out to raise. And that's where Charlie's own company, Harmonic Finance, can come in. They specialize in building finance teams for startups and scale-ups, from fractional CFOs to finance directors who understand the world of food and drink and investment inside out. So if you're serious about raising capital or scaling your business, check them out at harmonicfinance.com. And now back to Charlie. So having worked with so many businesses, what's the kind of biggest mistake you've seen in doing your first hires or your early hires?
I think the biggest thing is, I think founders often look for what I kind of refer to as like the sort of messiah hire. So this like one person that's going to come in and dramatically transform the business and solve all of the problems. I'm not suggesting that like talent can't be transformational, right? Or we wouldn't have a successful business. But I think we all have to try and be, as founders, a bit more realistic about like the art of the possible with that. So I think if you're looking for like high impact hire before you go to market, whether that's through a headhunter or directly, you need to be able to clearly define what would change within 3, 6, 9 months.
Right.
If you hire this person and they do an amazing job.
Yeah.
So like focus on like outcomes rather than, oh my gosh, this person, you know, was a senior manager at Innocent when they went through their growth journey. Like, you know, reputation's important, referencing's important, but actually it's more around like, what is this person practically going to be able to deliver for you? What are the outcomes?
Be realistic.
Totally. Yeah.
And one of the things that I've often think about is that, well, like you said, the salesperson is often a good early hire. Salesperson is really good at selling, including themselves.
Yeah.
And I've seen so many people hire salespeople who they're not that messiah hire because they overpromise and underdeliver.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because I think hiring salespeople, whether that's like at chief revenue officer level or kind of BDR, are actually the most difficult hires to make within consumer.
Right.
And the reason that those recruitment processes are often run very badly are founders are often insanely busy, and as a result of that, fail to take proper references on people.
Oh,
because
really?
they're too busy. It happens so infrequently that they will invest time in taking references properly.
But does anyone ever give an honest reference? Aren't you legally obliged to say nice stuff?
Yes, to an extent.
Yeah.
But equally, if someone's done a good job within a business, it's very unlikely that you will not find an executive or a leader that will give an off the record positive reference for that person.
Right.
And I think this is more challenging, I think, in fairness, for people coming out of big corporates. You know, getting someone at Unilever, for instance, to give you anything more than a kind of HR reference is tricky, right? But I think once we get into the kind of rung below that, if you can't get a co-founder or COO or equivalent to get on the phone and provide a reference, I think red flag's too extreme, but it's certainly an amber flag. I think the second thing is for founders out there that are looking at recruiting salespeople, speak to some of the customers. You know, ask to speak to some of the clients with whom they have relationships. You know, ask them about their experience. Go into in detail a breakdown of the difference between the customers that they originated and the customers that they maybe inherited from the founders as well. And I'd say that final point is the key thing where it goes awry, is that you might have a salesperson that can claim that they brought in X account, whether that's, you know, retail, Tesco, or whatever. But actually, if you get into the detail and reference them properly, they didn't originate that relationship, they inherited it. And that's the difference. You know, there's a big difference between people who are hunters and people who are great account managers. You probably need both, but in your growth phase, you need those outbound business development people.
And do you think it's key to kind of actually get references on the phone?
100%.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's got
Just
to be video call or phone. I think is key. And again, like, I would encourage founders or, you know, senior hiring managers watching this, just be tenacious to get those conversations in. I have very rarely seen a placement work out for like a commercial person where they haven't been able to provide strong references and advocates, including from customers.
The one thing I do notice about entrepreneurs, though, is that they're often not very self-aware.
Yeah.
And is there any help that they can get in online tests that they can do to kind of work out what their weaknesses and strengths are? Like, do you know what I mean?
No, I do. Yeah. And I think, you know, the answer to that is yes. You know, there's an interesting product actually called Test Gorilla that you can use for that actually as a consumer as well as a business. It's interesting, isn't it? That part of kind of self-awareness, or in that, you know, I think to be a founder, and you know this yourself, like, you have to be slightly delusional because, you know, every day you wake up, there are kind of multiple reasons why it's absolutely nuts to be running a startup, right? But I think the other thing that I would really advise founders to do is two things. I think one is become part of a founder community, and maybe more than one. Ideally communities where they also have kind of subgroups where, you know, you can get together, and it's something I've done for the last sort of 15 years, to share ideas and get advice, and find your kind of people who will give it to you straight about what's working and what's not. But also equally, you know, and this can be challenging, I think, in the early stage of a business, but I really believe that like great business coaches can be transformational even at early stage, I think, for a lot of founders. Yeah, in terms of helping them kind of really evaluate where they need to delegate, where are their blind spots, you know, how can they improve as leaders as well.
Yeah. And I mean, I imagine there are quite a few kind of business coach sharks out there. So where can you find good people, and what should you kind of expect to invest in that? Is it expensive?
Yeah, I mean, there are, right? Like, I think it's a bit like within, you know, therapy, right? Like, I don't know if you're a Peep Show fan, but I think there's like quite a lot of, for the Peep Show fans out there's quite a lot of jazzes out there doing like life coaching and things who shouldn't be, right? I think that said, there are also a lot of like very skilled coaches who've had, you know, massive impact on, you know, a number of the founders that you and I would both acknowledge as key successes. So I think the key thing with coaching is I would only recommend connecting with a coach who has worked with another founder or founders for a period. Check your references, you know, get tangible feedback on like what impact that person has had. But I know there are some great groups within consumer. I mean, one being, you know, Ed Haddon Coaching, who has a collective of coaches that work with a lot of consumer founders actually. And I think the reason they add value is that a lot of them are ex-entrepreneurs who then spent 15, 20 years doing the theory, so that kind of founders like myself or yourself don't have to spend a lot of time explaining to them what SKU means or supply chain optimization and things like that.
Got you. Nice. Cool. So you've got Harmonic, you're supporting with all these different roles, and I mean the list of businesses, FMCG, challenger brands, superstars that you've worked with is pretty insane. You've obviously already mentioned like Simmer and Mindful Chef, but Oatly, Heights, Corsten Press. What insider tips can you give us about like how they've built a team that has succeeded?
I mean, I think the first thing is like, it's coming back to that point I made around kind of like purpose and how you communicate that.
Yeah.
So I think all of those brands have done a great job of having, I guess, what's referred to as like an employer value proposition.
Yeah.
So it's very clear to people that want to join that business, like what mission they're getting behind. What are they trying to change? Where are they trying to get to? And I think all of those brands you mentioned have done a very good job of communicating that. I think it's easier to recruit and retain high performing teams when you're going through a growth journey as well. You know, everyone likes being part of a rocket ship. You know, growth is chaotic, but it's exciting.
But then you can kind of artificially fuel that growth with investment.
You can, yeah. And I think that's double-edged, right? I think that kind of investment can be great from an employee perspective. If you're coming in at a kind of mid to semi-senior level, you know, it generally means more generous base salaries, improved benefits, fancy offices, etc. I think for founders, it can be more double-edged. You know, if it works out, you can scale your business maybe 20 times more successfully than you could have done and get a big exit. But equally, it's probably statistically more likely that you'll grow it maybe 5 times more and, you know, dilute your equity down so that you're left with less at the end. And also that, you know, as you suggest, like that kind of rapid growth, as we've seen with a few businesses that have struggled recently, like can be problematic in terms of culture as well. In terms of going from that kind of really tight team, often where kind of friendship and business is blended, and that camaraderie where you're all kind of in the trenches, you know, out of necessity, everyone has to be a generalist really. As you shift through the gears, you know, tipping point usually being around that kind of 7-8 mil revenue area for FMCG, you have to bring in specialists, and often those are people who will come in externally. And that's where the leadership kind of challenge comes in terms of like, how do you bring these people into the fold while still retaining the kind of core essence of what made your brand special? That's the art, really.
Yeah. So that's to do with company culture, is it?
Yeah, I think so. And being able to communicate a strategy. So, you know, I think if I think about, you know, who's executed rather on that effectively, you know, Tim Lee at Mindful Chef is a really interesting case study, I think. You know, we worked with the folks there when I think there were only 12 of them. We recruited their first CFO, Kate McNuff, who, you know, took them through private equity investment with Piper and then, you know, through the Nestle acquisition. But Tim came in as a much more mature profile. You know, the founders were, I think, late 20s, early 30s. Tim, I guess, was probably around 50, came in from Marks and Spencer's. Yeah. Very different profile. But I think what he did brilliantly was, you know, understand what made that business unique in terms of its brand, product, audience. You know, he really nurtured that and allowed the people that had gotten to that point to kind of develop it. Yeah. And what he added was that kind of big business structure, reporting, etc. But got out of the way when he needed to, so that they didn't kind of lose what had made them unique. Yeah,
the special sauce. I want to kind of quote one of my FMCG heroes, Emma Hill from Lucky Saint, who said, well, I think she used the quote from someone else, but I heard her say that culture eats strategy for breakfast. What do you think? What does that mean to you?
I think it's true up to a point. I think it depends on market conditions. And just to clarify, I think Emma's amazing, by the way. But I think that particularly in a competitive market for hiring and retaining talent, I think the main reason actually why people stay in their jobs, actually, and this has been proven with a lot of research, is one, alignment with mission, but also actually, do they care about the people that they work with, their colleagues?
Right.
Do they have friends at work, actually, interestingly? And that's where the culture really does come in. I think that said, as a business evolves and, perhaps they're thinking of startups here, the sort of demographic of people that they employ mature, have kids, have slightly different priorities, and or they start having to hire in, external specialists who are maybe in their 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
I think those people care much more about strategy, like what's the plan?
Right.
What are our objectives? Where are we going? And when cash is tight, and a lot of companies in FMCG have had to do restructures over the last 3 years, for instance, I think that's when teams will really look to their leaders to have a clear strategy and plan. And I think culture and vibes at that point, it's not like it's unimportant, but I think it does become secondary.
That's a really good way of putting it. I also want to go back to building the initial team, because I think delegation is a challenge for a lot of people. I don't know if you've got any insight into kind of the challenges of, because the founders basically built this mini business on their own. Yeah. And I think they often maybe they've had the self-awareness to work out where their gaps are. They're hiring people, but delegation is often really tricky.
Yeah. And I'm really keen to not be a hypocrite here. It's something that I really struggle with.
Really?
As well.
Yeah.
I've got better as I've, I guess, kind of matured.
And what's the secret of getting better at it?
I actually kind of credit, part of it is just fucking things up, to be honest.
Right.
There are a number of mistakes I've made over the years because I didn't delegate.
Yeah.
So I think there's kind of a wisdom element, hopefully, that you kind of accrue with more years as a founder.
Yeah.
I think also as well, I would really credit my business coach, actually, that I've worked with for a number of years, with really helping me with that actually as well.
Right.
Because that's one of the things that can be, without getting my little violin out, I think one of the things a number of Bread and Jam community members would say is it can be quite lonely, actually.
Oh God, yeah.
And you may have experienced that yourself at times. And actually sometimes just having that voice there really holding you accountable can be really helpful. And I think that is where having a coach, or, if people don't have the capital available to pay for that, trying to find yourself a trusted mentor that can look at your business cold from a kind of organizational structure perspective and help you really kick the tires on roles and responsibilities and, whether you've got the right people in the right seats. Is really helpful. And it's something that we do a lot for our customers, actually, is we'll go in and, often one of the first phases, people will say, look, I need a CEO or I need a CFO. And actually when we get into the detail, often they need something completely different.
Right.
And, or it might be better that they postpone that hire for 6 months and bring someone up through the ranks.
You've just heard Charlie talk about the importance of working with the right people and the right tools. And for nearly 10 years, that's exactly what we've been helping founders with at Bread and Jam. Whether it's our annual festival, our one-day summits, or our accelerator program, it's where the most exciting challenger brands learn how to grow and last in the market. If you're ready to sharpen your thinking, meet the right buyers and investors, and build a team that can actually scale your business, visit breadandjamfest.com and come to our next event. Now back to Charlie. And that kind of, that I want to think about that loneliness as well, because I'm a big kind of proponent of having a co-founder. I personally, I don't advise people to kind of start out on their own if they can avoid it.
Yeah.
Because I think you need that someone to kind of bounce ideas off, someone that you want to impress, someone that wants to impress you.
Yeah.
Do you think that co-founders versus founders have an advantage or disadvantage between each other?
I think businesses that have co-founders do have a distinct advantage. on a number of fronts. I mean, one is if you're looking to raise capital, it's not impossible as a solo founder, as we know, but it's much more difficult. Because it's seen, solo founders are seen as a single point of failure by investors. So I think that's just something to think about. And, pretty much all VCs in particular will be open with you about that. I think the second thing, as you say, is it's just that having a co-founder, particularly if you have separate but complementary skills, is key.
Yeah.
I think where things can go wrong, though, and I've seen this happen a number of times over the years, is where you have two co-founders who are very similar, both behaviorally and also in terms of their skill set. That can be difficult. And that's where we sometimes, for instance, see, co-CEOs, which, can be extremely confusing for the team as well, actually.
Yeah. What do you feel about, there are lots of, when you're doing your first hires and you're hiring a kind of key person for the next stage of your growth, there are lots of kind of schemes like the EMI scheme to kind of give them skin in the game, so to give them some equity. What do you feel that that's a good idea? Have you kind of seen that work? Have you seen things go wrong? Are there mistakes to be avoided?
I'm a big advocate actually of EMI schemes. So I launched an EMI scheme in my first business, from which I think, ultimately a few people, got 7-figure sums, but a number of people got 6-figure sums. Wow. So we've worked with a number of businesses, and I'm talking, dozens here, where there's been really meaningful wealth creation for employees through those schemes. We're actually just about to roll out an EMI scheme specifically actually in Harmonic. So I'm a big proponent of EMI. I think it's been a really positive thing for the UK startup ecosystem actually as well. I think that said, I think the majority of equity schemes are rolled out really poorly for a number of reasons, really. I think that they're often kind of miscommunicated, I think, to team members. So we see it all the time where founders, dilute by, anything 20 to 30%, but actually then don't communicate effectively to the team, what they're being given and what it means for them. They often fail to kind of communicate the value of that equity and how that equity will grow as kind of revenue, ARR, etc. grows. So you end up with a situation where there's kind of an initial sugary hit where the team are like, oh, great, I've got some equity. Yeah. And they kind of forget about it. Yeah. So it loses its kind of power as a sort of, should be a key retention and motivational tool. So I think there's a key kind of comms piece around EMI that I don't think I exaggerate when I say I think in 85% of cases it's launched averagely and then managed poorly, I think is key. I think the other thing that can be problematic though as well is just that, if you have businesses that have EMI schemes where they've been launched when the business is at quite a high valuation, if that business then ends up in situations where trading is less positive, the value of that equity or those options rather for the team, can be, terminology is underwater. So they can become worthless. And that's, for those businesses, that is then a challenge.
Yeah. And then tell me about mentoring. You do kind of, outside of Harmonic, you kind of support people, other founders. Yeah. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, so I've done that for, it's probably about 12, 13 years now. Currently do most of that through two organizations, actually. One is Unrest, who are an ethical impact startup accelerator program for consumer startups. So brands you'll know from that include Bold Bean, actually. Amelia, that's how I got to know her. Right. But also companies like Citizens of Soil, who obviously in the olive oil space. But I also do some work with Tech Nation, actually, who do an accelerator program for tech and also kind of consumer product startups. So yeah, it's something that's kind of very important to me in terms of sounds very worthy, doesn't it? But just I think in terms of being able to share some of my experiences, I think particularly around some of the investor relations piece, right? areas around things like, go-to-market strategy, hiring, etc. It's something I get a lot out of.
Yeah. And I'm sure the brands and businesses get a lot out of it. Do you know where people who are listening could look for mentors? Are there good resources for kind of finding free or cheap mentoring?
Truthfully, no. And I think that's kind of an interesting point, right? I think that I would encourage less experienced founders actually, though, to be brave and like cold outreach to some entrepreneurs that they admire. And it doesn't have to be the founder, it could also be kind of senior operators. So, if you're a supply chain leader and you're looking for advice on that, I think people will find that actually, particularly within the food and beverage community, people like want to help each other out.
Yeah.
And it is something that we do at Harmonic on a, pro bono basis, is we will often connect people within companies to help each other out. As for kind of there being a sort of bank or kind of resource, though, I think that's something that's lacking. Maybe it could be a bread and jam.
Yeah. And I've always wanted to do something around that.
Yeah, because I think there are a lot of people, particularly exited founders,
absolutely,
or I think would want to maybe kind of give back. Yeah.
But certainly at Bread and Jam, like those kind of connections are made. And I think LinkedIn is probably also good. Like you say, just kind of reach out to people who...
Yeah, it's rare. It's very rare, I think, certainly within food and beverage, because it's a really inspiring place to be, as we know, right? There's tangible, wonderful products, but it's arguably one of the hardest areas to build in. And so I think other people understand that struggle. And I think for that reason, I think a number of people maybe watching this will be pleasantly surprised by how receptive some people may be to sort of giving you a bit of time each month. So yeah, be brave and ping out those emails.
Yeah. So on that note, talking about how great the food and drink industry is with tangible products.
Yeah.
We're going to end the podcast by sharing a product with each other that we both champion and want the other person to try. So I've bought some pickles.
Nice.
From a brand called Goat Rodeo Goods.
Yeah.
Who have absolutely flying at the moment. They did amazingly at Christmas. And obviously pickles is doing really well.
Yeah.
All the gut health benefits, and a personal favorite of mine. So do you want me to fish one out?
Yeah, let's do it.
You can...
Love the branding on that as well.
Yeah, it's
where are they from, those guys?
They're from the Highlands.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know too much about the founders, but let's try it and see what you think.
It's a very nice pickle, Jason.
It's quite pokey, isn't it?
It is quite pokey,
yeah. I do love a pickle. It says hot dog as hell. Born in the wild west of Scotland.
Interesting.
Cool. So what have you got for us?
So I've brought Brativo, which has become a bit of a staple in our house, actually.
Right.
Back in Walthamstow. So my partner and I are sort of slightly addicted to this. It's a non-alcoholic beverage.
Right.
That I think is sort of best tasted with either soda water or tonic.
Okay.
It's very helpfully very low calorie. But it's actually the core ingredients are British apple cider vinegar, but it's also got wildflower honey, rosemary, thyme, orange zest.
Wow.
So
Sounds amazing.
It's quite kind of botanical.
Yeah.
But it's for those people like myself who like bitter drinks, like Negronis, etc.
Oh, I love a Negroni.
Right, nice. So it's kind of a good alternative for that, and it sort of prevents the kind of founder descent into alcoholism I found as well. Anyway. So does look a little bit like piss, but other than that,
doesn't taste like it.
It
luckily.
does not taste like piss.
And is it? Have they got good distribution? Like, did you buy this online or did you get it?
So we actually came across it, I think, because Amy, I think the founder, again, not dissimilar to Amelia, has done a really good job actually of building presence actually on LinkedIn and socials.
Yeah.
But they've also done a really good job of getting the beverage stocked in like all of the Soho House clubs.
Nice.
And a number of restaurants. Yeah. And I think what they've also done really well is get a lot of mixologists who have quite big followings on like Instagram and stuff to publicize the product.
Oh, yeah.
Needs a bit of ice, but...
Yeah, a bit of ice would be amazing. But that is really good. Really tasty. And it's just, it hits the mark in the sense of you want to have a kind of treat drink.
Exactly.
That isn't alcohol.
Yeah, there's like a bit of a, like, sounds pretentious, but there's a bit of a sort of ritual to it. You feel like you're having a grown-up drink. Yeah. So, yeah, it stopped me drinking a bottle of whiskey every night as well. So that's good.
It's got to be worth it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, on that note, thank you so much for joining me. Really learned a lot about team building, about your learnings and your background. So really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Pleasure. Great to chat.